This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? This is the first, well, I guess now it's the second show. We did do another show in between here. Second show of the 7th year of Where Did the Road Go? And as usual, I have tried to make this the case for the last few years. I have Mike Clelland and Aaron Gulyas here with me. Hello, guys.
Hey.
Hello, thank you.
And we're going to do another edition of UFO History, covering stuff that's happened since the last time you were on.
Which was about a year ago, right?
Yeah, just about a year ago. It's always the first show of the new year. For not the new year as in the calendar year, but the new year for the show.
The season, yeah.
However, we did do a quick show, which turned out to be a lot longer than I expected on the Casey, what was the kid's name that disappeared and said he was fostered by
the
a bear?
The bear.
Yeah. Because that seemed like something we couldn't not do something on. It was all over the place, and there was a lot of misinformation being thrown around. And in the end, it's still a weird story.
Yeah, it is.
Because there's
I suspect the bear was working for the DIA or something.
I mean, when it comes down to it, there's no reason that kid should have still been alive.
Right.
You know, two days in in 20-degree weather with rain out in the woods.
Yeah, not a likely survival scenario.
Yeah. So we were comparing, and despite Aaron, you being in what's normally the coldest area, I believe Mike is actually in the coldest at the moment.
Yes,
I think we're about tied. I think it's about 1 or 2 degrees outside right now.
Yeah. It feels about the same, probably.
Yeah, well, probably. I'm at 0 with a negative 27 wind chill, and that's approximately where you guys are too.
Yeah, wind chill's about the same, but I'm at like 1.
Yeah, we're all basically the same little. Get Grant Cameron on the phone. So he's the one that's in Winnipeg. So.
Right. So when I sat down to put together topics for this show, I didn't feel like there's a lot of really important stuff that happened in the last year that doesn't involve people in a sense. Like there were no major events. There were no major UFO events or anything that happened this last year that really stood out to me. Yeah,
I felt the same way. I was sort of making my little mental list of things that happened, and it all seemed to be very much sort of heavily weighted to people and organizations and media sorts of things.
Yeah.
So which sometimes there's not every year is going to have something wild and earth shattering. So sometimes it's sort of a bureaucratic ufology year.
Well, let's start with one of the ones that you guys mentioned that I don't actually know that much about, and this is this whole MUFON thing.
Yeah, I think the most recent thing, just a couple weeks ago, about a week and a half ago, a guy named Phil Leach, who was a some kind of director of some case review team, I think it was called, released this 5-page PDF called MUFON: The Inside Truth. And you can get a really good breakdown of the whole thing with responses from MUFON people at Jack Brewer's UFO Trail blog. He did a really good job of breaking down sort of Leach's claims and then getting feedback from various people. But there's just some stuff that kind of builds on some of the MUFON wackiness of recent years. There's some things that, like in case files in their case management system that all of the field investigators have access to. Leach alleged that there was private medical information, stuff that legally is like HIPAA protected stuff, like lists of medications that witnesses were taking that investigators just put in this system that was accessible by hundreds of MUFON people, probably hundreds at the very outside, and investigators running background checks on witnesses. Sometimes I think without the witnesses' knowledge, and having that information in the case file system too. So some privacy issues like that. John Ventre is his continued maybe involvement, maybe not, in response to his things. Some talk about a secret MUFON lab in Pennsylvania.
Wait! What's the secret MUFON lab in Pennsylvania? I've read this. Was this in the document? I've got this open in front of me right now.
It sort of comes out in some of the conversation around it. But the funniest thing, in Jack's write-up on it, there's this mention of this lab a MUFON lab in Pennsylvania, and in his email back to Jack, John Ventre just out of nowhere says, I've never run a lab, certainly not a meth lab. Nobody brings up meth lab. I certainly didn't run a meth lab. It's like, what the? And I'm thinking, John Ventre is running a meth lab somewhere. That's not true. That is not true. I am.
So what you're saying is John Ventre is running a meth lab?
I did not say that. I did. So there was that. There's something about an implant that was retrieved from a witness, and Leach claimed that the implant was turned over to the stars. And
he didn't call it to the stars. They called it the acronym that the
AATIP. And then Chloe, last name Kletsky, probably
Chase Kletsky.
Chase Kletsky. I keep
now, just as a full disclosure here, I'm friends with Chase Kletsky.
It's what's interesting, and I don't think she did. I think she did a pretty decent job of responding to the questions raised here, and certainly it says enough to make me wonder, if Leach has some particular axes to grind, and this is how he's going about it. But her response was that they did not turn the implant over to AATIP. They turned the implant over to Luis Elizondo, who was acting as part of the A&E documentary production team that was working with this. So completely nothing related to AATIP. We just gave it to the guy,
the main guy,
the main guy who works there.
And Chase has been working on a documentary, and I don't think it's been released yet. I'm not sure if it's a series or if it's a feature-length documentary.
If A&E is involved, that makes me think that it might be a series of some kind. They usually do. Well, sometimes they do one-off things, but so just some stuff like that, and that just builds on some other MUFON stuff. There's the state director. I think he was the state director in Washington, who resigned from MUFON.
James Clarkson.
Yeah, Clarkson, a couple of years ago.
Who's a great guy. He's a wonderful great guy.
I heard some interviews with him and read some stuff by him, and he seems really sharp. And his sort of, I don't know if allegation is the right word, that J.Z. Knight of the Ramtha channeling, I'm going to call it a cult, is part of MUFON's inner circle, big donor. And she was just in the news this week in federal court for some lawsuit that her cult is involved in. So, all of this stuff and just MUFON moving even further away from its supposed mission statement of the scientific study of UFOs for the betterment of mankind, or whatever it was. It's I just want APRO back. I really want Coral Lorenz and Donald Kehoe to come kick some people around. I think that'd be fun.
So it's funny because I have kind of rubbed shoulders with some of the names on this list, and I'm looking at the document that Phil Leach put out and such. I've never met Phil Leach, and I've watched a few of his videos, and he seems like a, straight up boots on the ground kind of researcher, and that was the core of MUFON, and still is in many ways. That's so my sense is, and everyone is at the, from the bottom up, you get these dedicated researchers who are out there doing hard work, and from the top down. And I guess that's true of any organization. And this is not a big organization. There's only 4,000 members, and that's what it says that's just a Wikipedia number. I suspect it's lower than that. How many people are actually paying members to MUFON? And I think it's like $45 a year, and all that gets you is the
journal.
The journal, which just comes out. It used to come out. I think it's 4 times a year.
Yeah, I was a member for a year and realized that I never read this thing. And $45 for 4 issues of a journal, that's a lot of money.
Yeah. And the journal, I mean, I guess there would have been a day when there would, that journal would have been somewhat vital, but it's pretty. Now I'm in a position where I've kind of feel like I've lost my mind in a lot of ways, and I'm just completely compulsively researching UFOs all the time, day after day. I'm writing and stuff like that. I'm doing, and I can say I never run across a MUFON report.
Yeah,
I never do, never. And there's a fellow named Roger Marsh who gets kind of treated pretty poorly in this document. And I've talked with Roger on the phone a few times. He's been wonderful, and he did a thing for a while. He was kind of he was actually making money. I can't remember how it was. I think it was they would monitor the clicks or something like that. And he was actually making pretty good money for a while writing these. He would go through the database. The reports were posted. They're live. You could just get on it. He would pick these really good reports. And then, from the report, without really interviewing the journalist, or playing the role of journalist and interviewing the person in the report, he would write a little essay about it. And he had all the disclosure. He basically said this came from the case files and it has not been investigated. This is just, and he would do a really tidy job. And some of them were remarkably interesting, really wonderful stuff. There was one in particular where someone reported a UFO, and the witness will occasionally do an illustration, and the witness did an illustration, and it was like a Malibu house, right? And it was like a house with windows and a porch and palm trees, and it was hovering and moving across the sky. And I was like, well, that nobody's going to make that up, right? So now there's this weird thing here, and Roger will talk about this. I'm not saying anything that he hasn't shared publicly. Roger wrote a book. Roger Marsh, the head of MUFON Media, up until whatever it's very, very cryptic in this document. He just all of a sudden seems to have vanished from the face of the earth. I don't think that's quite true, but that's the way it's written in this very kind of, the guy does have an axe to grind. You can read it. I wish I could have been his editor and said, okay, let's wait till tomorrow morning. I'm going to take a red pen and I'll clean this up a little bit for you because you sound kind of grumpy. And but Roger Marsh wrote a book about his first-hand UFO contact experiences. He's an abductee. And Phil Leach, if you go to his bio on the MUFON page, the first thing he says is, yeah, I had 2 missing time events in my car. And he describes these classic UFO missing time events. And he doesn't go any further. It's very funny. There's this thing that I've come to recognize where people have these experiences and they'll just kind of well, isn't that interesting? And now I'm researching UFOs full time. So Chase Kletsky had a very close contact with a gray alien in one of her, when she was researching this, an event, I think it was in, I want to say Tennessee. I'm pretty sure that's right. Jan Harzan tells a story where him and his brother had a missing time event with a UFO sighting above a telephone pole. So they had the height of it. They could get the height of it. They could estimate the size of it. He was a kid at the time. He was watching Saturday morning cartoons, got called out by his brother. They both watched this hovering flying saucer above a telephone pole. So, it was close. It was big. And then they went back in and the cartoons were all wrong. They had missed like over an hour of time. I'm paraphrasing. This is something he has talked about publicly. So anything I'm saying here, and I'm not I don't, all of this stuff is out there. This is, and my assumption. So I'm forced to, like, my little radar's up, and I'm forced to wonder how many people, what percentage of the people in MUFON, even at the higher ups. I mean, Jan Harzen, the executive director of MUFON, have had these contact experiences. So,
I know that Bill
Konkoleski,
yes,
in my home state. Yes,
the Michigan State director is an experiencer as well. Now, you mentioned MUFON Media, and what's interesting is in her response to Jack's write-up of this, Chase says, quote, "MUFON Media, I have never heard of this department or team in MUFON. It does not exist."
It might have been public relations or something.
It's just, but the guy, then somebody else in the comments says his business card said MUFON Media. So it's just, it's a small organization that, they seem so shambolic and disorganized sometimes. And so much, I mean, whether, no matter, like Leach issuing this 5-page, j'accuse of all of MUFON's press, it's sort of a high school level of drama in this organization that's just been playing out for the last few years. And you never had this back in Walt Andrus's time, but well, you did.
I'm sure you did. Yeah. They didn't have Twitter back then. So
imagine if they would have had Twitter in 1989, when Bill Moore goes to the MUFON symposium, and you've got Bill English there, doing his thing, and Bill Cooper and John. Imagine if social media had been around then. That would have been wild.
That would have changed things.
It was pretty wild. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't there. That was long before I was into this stuff, but it's very funny. Like this PDF, like the PDF heard around the world. Like, I mean, a lot of people are in my, well, not a lot, but I read the whole thing, and high school is a good way to put it. Yes, I'm certain there are real issues here. One of the things that was funny in this was the, I'm not going to read the direct quote here, but Jan Harzan said, why don't we have a TV show? We should have our own TV show. And the author, Phil Leach, kind of says, well, we had Hangar 1, and I think we got kind of a bad reputation from that because we were kind of fibbing a lot in how this, what we were reporting, and we were reporting on things that weren't MUFON cases, like Eisenhower meeting the aliens.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
And and I know a handful of people who have had, not a handful, two. I know two people who have had their stories fictionalized by MUFON, and they got them completely backwards. Like one guy had this wonderful, lovely, blissful, almost angelic experience. Well, not almost angelic. He says straight up, it was angels. His wife does, certainly. And that would be Ray Hernandez. And they did a session, and his dog was cured of cancer. They were getting ready to take his little dog to be put down. And then there's this glowing gelatinous plasma floating in the living room. And the dog is running around like a puppy and lived for many more years. So, and that was played out in the recreation, the dramatization as, nightmare, scary music, horror in the house. They hired actors to play UFO investigators and researchers on Hangar 1, which I've met a lot of these guys. They're totally charismatic. They could they could hold their own in front of a camera.
Right.
Yeah, and I know Harzan has said, well, the producers, that wasn't us. That was the producers. That everything bad about it was the producers. Nothing bad about it was MUFON's responsibility, right? And it's like at some point you've got to just take a little bit of the blend. Yeah, Hangar 1 was, and this is a 501c3, right? I'd be interested to see MUFON's books. I'd be interested to see where this money goes. They didn't give away stuff to TV producers for this show for nothing. So I'd be interested to see their books. I actually, I got a project for next week now. There's some, stuff there's public records. I'd just be interested to see for how many members they have, how much money they bring in from various sources. Yeah. Anyway, it's
that they get it from Jay-Z Knight.
Yeah,
That's where they get their money, and
Exactly.
that was John Venture's whole thing. The whisperings were all like, well, he's like bankrolling a lot of
Yeah.
MUFON. He's was wealthy and could just write the check that they needed, and so he could say whatever he wanted, and
Yeah.
post racist stuff on Facebook, and they just turned a blind eye because he was. This is the story. I'm giving you the
Right.
the catty, gossipy version of it. But
my favorite thing about the Ventra story was Harzan's sort of response to it on the MUFON website, which is, really, aren't the people complaining about Ventre just as bad as Ventre? Like, no, no, they're not. They're just haters,
there's an audio interview for you that Kevin Randall did with Jan Harzan that just your toes are going to curl in your shoes listening to that one, because basically, Kevin asked the questions that need to be asked, and you can hear poor Jan trying to backpedal furiously. And I've talked with Jan on the phone. I did this thing, I was in this headspace for a long time. I was just like, well, heck, I'm just going to pick up the phone and call the guy. And I did, and he answered the phone. And I was like, hello. And we talked for, 15 minutes or something. And he was totally pleasant, amiable, and answered all my questions. He didn't, here's what I asked. I said, can I come look at your files? I'm a UFO researcher. I publish books. I would like to look at your files. And there was this pause, like, what? Look at the files. It's like, yeah, that's their mission statement, is to be a source of information for them. And there was this like dead silence, just like, you could just tell that it was like off his radar. Like, actually look at the info we've gathered. It doesn't even, and it was shocking. Isn't that like, shouldn't it all be, obviously you could, vet it and take people's names out and do appropriate stuff like that, but
right.
Shouldn't it all be out there?
Yeah. And this, this is, I was thinking about other 2018 stuff, and their director of research, Chris Cogswell, resigned in April. And because he was told that Ventre had been removed from the organization, then he found out, he was still, his name was taken off the website, but he was still doing stuff. And so he, had a, actually much better sort of document press release than Leach did, because it was like, I was misled about this. I don't want to be a part of this organization. And this quote, when I joined MUFON, I had hoped to bring a scientific viewpoint and strong critique of ideas to this field. Sadly, it appears I will have to attempt this elsewhere. I'm sorry, my trust was misplaced. So it's not just this most recent thing, and going back to Hangar One, and I think part of the problem is, and this came across in Clarkson's some of the interviews with Clarkson I've heard, and other things about MUFON is what is the purpose and point of the giant research organization in the modern UFO world? And I think MUFON's attempts to reinvent itself and stay relevant and stay sort of nimble, I just don't think they've had the skill and leadership to pull it off well. And so you sort of see them, I sort of see them sort of foundering out there.
Oh my gosh, they're like the big dead fish is already on the starting to smell on the beach.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I almost said it's sad, but it's not really sad. It's a UFO research organization. Nobody should really care about this, but I care. And I care about those people who. I care about the people who are Googling around for information about UFOs, and MUFON's the first thing that comes up, instead of all kinds of other stuff they could be seeing. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to MUFON. Regardless of what happens, I think we're going to see more dissension, more people leaving in a huff, more sort of semi-true sounding exposés. If you enjoy high schooly drama, I think 2019 is going to be your year.
Well, the issue for me, the deeper issue for me is it's a bureaucratic institution but why so I've had this conversation with Richard Dolan, and he goes right to the heart. In his opinion, is that this MUFON is run by people with military intelligence backgrounds, and it's not happening by accident.
Yeah, that's one of the. Yeah,
they are. I'm paraphrasing Richard Dolan, and they are a vacuum. They are sucking up UFO information all around the world, not just in America, but all around the world. And that vacuum tube goes right into a vault, and nothing comes out. It comes into a black hole where the gravity sucks it in, never ever to see the light of day again. And I'm not exaggerating as far as that. That is my sense too. Every once in a while, whatever, there's a MUFON journal that comes out 4 times a year. There are very few interesting articles in the MUFON journal. There's some, but given the volume of data they must have it, and that's what wasn't like Jacques Vallée saying we need to like have a statisticians kind of crunch the numbers, take the data, plug it in, have a team of grad students just plugging the UFO data into the big giant spreadsheet and see what shows up. That data is out there, and there's also I'm getting totally I'm like. I've talked to. This is the conversations when the MUFON investigators kind of look right and left at the UFO conference. Is anyone listening? And I've heard this from more than one person that Walt Andrus kept a whole bunch of files, like decades of files, in his garage, and they got wet and mildewy, and they all got thrown out.
I've heard something like that too.
I don't know whether that's true, but it's certainly there's no way to test it because nobody can look at the files.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And doesn't Bigelow have something to do with MUFON at this point too?
Bigelow. Now I may butcher this a little bit. James Clarkson was the executive director of MUFON in, I believe, this would have been around 2008.
Do you mean James Carrion?
James Carrion, I'm sorry,
Yes.
James Clarkson. Thank you. The same first name. James Carrion was the executive director in 2008, 2009 or so, and he made a deal with Bigelow, and Bigelow gave him a fair amount of money. I don't think it was that much. I think it was like $700,000. I mean, which is a lot of money, especially for an organization like MUFON. And he basically had access to the database. Now, the myth, the sort of whispered stories. So I'm telling complete hearsay. So I'm telling the gossip, was that MUFON, these stories would go into the database, right? They would show up because it was all automated. It was all online. Somebody would say, "I saw a UFO in my neighborhood," and they would click, send it to MUFON. MUFON would then get around the next morning, and they would open up the files, and they would say, "Oh, that's in the state. Let's contact the state director, and let's send someone over there." And there was a process that was in place. They would get to the site of the UFO sighting, and the people would say, "Oh, Bigelow's people were already here. They already talked to us." And it get a little bit more nefarious than that, where they kind of said, "Oh, we were told not to talk to MUFON." And now this is all gossip and stuff, and I don't know what's true and what's not. But that shows up in the book that the 38th Parallel, the 37th Parallel by what's his name, the guy who wrote the book on I'm trying to blank on the author's name. It was a big popular book, and that came out a little over a year ago. Is someone looking this up? 37th Parallel. It was a
up right now.
It was a guy who. So the guy who actually wrote it is really good at making movie deals, and he talks openly about the fact that when he writes a book, he's got movie deals in the back of his mind. And Ben
Mesrich.
Ben Mesrich, yes, and he wrote the Facebook movie. He wrote the Facebook book that got turned into the social networking movie.
Okay, yeah,
and he's funny and he's charismatic. There's a really good, almost like a TED Talk kind of thing. Like he basically says, here's how I got involved in this UFO thing. He's super funny and charismatic on stage. It's great to watch that. That'll give you a good rundown of the story. And so he got kind of so the Bigelow issue shows up in that book too. I tried to read that book. It was a little bit like I don't know, UFOs for Dummies a little bit. So it was kind of like, it was a great introductory book, and I was tough to wade through that. And the fellow who they talked to, he originally wrote it kind of wanting to make fun of this guy. I think I'm doing this right. Chuck Zolkowski, I think is his name. And he is a UFO researcher in Colorado who does a lot of cattle mutilation work. And he has a license plate that says UFO Nut. And he's a gregarious, easy to get along with guy. I've met him at a UFO conference, and super likable. And Ben Mesrick went in thinking he was going to kind of like, oh, here's like a little, like, let's do a little like a story about a guy who's super obsessed. And he got dragged into this and said, oh no, there's really something here. And ended up liking the guy and ended up respecting his research. So it's, that's the story. So I think, but that, I'm not sure when that book came out. That was interesting because that book got a huge push. That book was like, in the window, if there isn't even bookstores anymore, like in the window at Barnes and Noble and things like that, as far as, which doesn't happen with UFO books very often.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's look at Rendlesham. And this was something I almost completely forgot about. It kind of popped up and then disappeared pretty quick. But back in, I think it was December, the SAS claimed that Rendlesham Forest aliens were them getting revenge on the U.S. soldiers. And so the story goes that they had tested the U.S. security by parachuting into the base, and they were held and severely interrogated and everything else and called aliens. So when they left, they decided to get revenge, and they rigged up a bunch of pyrotechnics, and that was what the Rendlesham UFO case was. Now, someone who is and the person who wrote all this is anonymous, of course. And it says, one man who should know the truth is Robin Horsfall, a former SAS sniper. Robin took part in the famous Special Forces operation that stormed in the Iranian embassy to free hostages just 6 months before the alleged prank in Rendlesham. Horsfall tells me that the letter writer is someone dangling a fishing rod. The language Frank uses provides no evidence of a military background. He says the letter is written by a person with a solid grounding in grammar, which, in my opinion, excludes most SAS operatives during the period, including the commissioned officers.
Oh, that's some nice shade right there. That's. Oh, he's going to get killed.
So, I mean, I think this was just someone looking for some attention,
Yeah, what's interesting is there's a faculty member at a university who worked for the National Archives over there, and he got this anonymous tip. David Clark is his name, and
that's actually that's who wrote this, actually.
Yeah, and he said he researched it for 3 years, and I'm not sure what he would have researched. I got a tip that it was a prank. Well, I'm going to spend 3 years looking into this prank, and it doesn't make any. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know.
No, and they saw more than just lights. That's
yeah. Remote controlled kites. I think the article I remember reading says something about remote controlled kites were used, black balloons, things like that. I mean,
done right, especially and nowadays technology, yeah, I could see that happening. But in what was it, 1980?
Yeah.
That's these guys had to be super gullible to fall for this.
I don't see this as just like, I don't think I would at an Air Force base. I don't think I would play a prank outside an Air Force base. There's people with guns in there. You might play a prank outside the junior high school, but not outside an Air Force base.
Well, yeah, and it just doesn't. Okay, we were on a training operation. We got embarrassed. Well, let's make a fake UFO. That'll show them. That just doesn't. I mean, we're gonna beat them up outside the pub next week. Yeah, that I can see that. That would be something. But we're gonna make a fake UFO. I don't know. It just adds to adds to the Rendlesham quagmire. Remember when Rendlesham was just like one of the more straightforward stories out there? Those were the days before, well, this guy might have been lying about a good chunk of it, and there's these other people, and now, anonymous SAS people say it was a prank, and it's become the British Roswell in more ways than one.
Yes, in fact, it's just a bunch of as much of a mess. And I bet you they're selling T-shirts and stuff there. I know there's I don't know what the town of Rendlesham is.
They better be.
Yeah. I don't know what they're doing with their lives if they're not selling T-shirts about this.
Yeah. But yeah, it definitely went from a very solid, interesting case to just a mess.
Yep.
And as we had mentioned before, Larry Warren, has now muddied the waters so much, whether he experienced anything at all, it's hard to tell. And that was kind of Peter Robbins' take on it too. He's like, I don't know when he was telling me the truth and when he wasn't, so I'm just throwing it all out.
Which is, I mean, I really admire that attitude, because that's,
so do I.
That there's nothing, and how many ufology people would say, well, you know what? I think I can still do a new edition of the book like this, and,
right.
And find a way to make money off it. But no, I think he did the most responsible thing.
Mm-hmm. So there's Rendlesham. Now, did either?
No, is this Peter Robbins and this? Here's this, like, this is where it gets weird. This is so. Peter Robbins and Larry Warren. The first time Larry was back to, or maybe not the first time. The first time Peter was at the actual site. They walked there at night and they saw UFOs in the sky, and they recorded it. So that was like a decade later, or more than a decade later. How did the pranksters come back a decade later and fool, Peter Robbins?
That area is known for sightings of odd stuff. I mean, that's the thing. That whole area is a hotbed for that stuff. It's just that in this case, it happened to be the military that encountered it.
Yeah. Which, as we know in UFO world, if the military encounters it, that's automatic, credibility, right? It's because that's how it works. Well, a pilot saw it. Well, so what? It doesn't mean it's what you want it to be.
Right. Yeah. And that brings us to the Irish UFO sightings that happened back in November or so, where a bunch of commercial pilots saw UFOs. Was it over Ireland?
I think, the Irish Sea. Maybe, yeah.
And I know nothing about this. So all the
It was like a blip on the radar, and then it went away.
Yeah, it was one of those things where it was sort of typical of 2018, right? It was the hint of an interesting story, and then no, that was the whole story. There was this blip, and then there wasn't. It was one of those sort of almost old school kind of, we have no idea what this might be, sort of things. And it was, some good speculation, some good discussion, some good sort of, I seem to recall, like on social media, some good sort of sciencey discussions of what things could have been, that might have caused it. So yeah, a neat story, but again, a very sort of compact and brief sort of thing.
Yeah. And the one pilot said it was moving so fast, it came up on our left-hand side and then rapidly veered to the north. It was a very bright light that disappeared at very high speed. And it fascinates me here because she doesn't describe a craft, she describes a light.
Yes. Yeah. I now that you read that, I remember it was very vague. It was a bright, fast-moving light.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's actually something that in 2018, I suspect, there's man-made technology that could mimic that,
Possibly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But maybe not. I mean, the fact that it's a light is what interests me, because it's less likely to be technology if it's just a light.
Or it's somehow projected from like a hologram from the ground.
Well, that could be too. And we're better.
I'm only speculating. I simply don't know. But
and we're better to test something like that than an area with pilots who are going to report it fairly accurately.
Yep, you're gonna get radio communications with the tower or wherever, like sort of real time what they're seeing in some cases.
Yeah.
And so if I was going to say, okay, how does this fancy new shiny stealth drone thing with a light, let's just say, if I wanted to see like, okay, how does this? We know what we want it to look like. What does somebody who doesn't know that this thing exists? How are they going to describe it? What are they going to see?
Yeah.
And you do that. You do it where there are flight paths and well-traveled areas, but not too well-traveled. And you get some first-hand information like that. Yeah.
But at the same time, it's typical of traditional UFO sightings.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say one way or the other.
And it's one of those things, you could come up with some sort of, Earth lights, sort of explanation. It really is a very sort of cool, sort of retro kind of sighting. Nostalgic a little bit. Something inexplicable seen by a pilot. We don't have enough of that anymore.
True. And so now let's move on to the thing that has occupied most of the UFO news, which is the To the Stars Academy.
Ugh.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about this. I think I said this before. Like, I'm not sure if I'm swearing or not, but when I see the little acronym for To the Stars Academy, like, I can't see it without seeing tits and ass.
Yeah.
Am I like, is that like out of line? I don't know if that's what I see when I see that little acronym. So.
Well, it's appropriate because it is kind of just a big show.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I was being a jerk on Twitter, and
no way.
Yeah, I know.
You can run for president. You can be president.
I could be. We've had like snow days every day this week, so I've resorted to trolling people on Twitter to get banned, or not banned, blocked. But there's To the Stars Academy, and then there's To the Star. There's like, they've got these separate divisions, and I kept tweeting at the one that was just the entertainment portion about UFO stuff, and they just got very frustrated with me, because we are not blah blah blah. We are not To the Stars Academy. We are To the Stars, entertainment. Like, you're all To the Stars entertainment, pal.
Yeah.
This is. I mean, and the thing is, that's great. You know what? You want to take some money and find some investors and make UFO themed documentaries and films and music and art. I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
My problem is less To the Stars than all the people who think To the Stars is this is the wave that is going to just sort of bring the truth to us. This is we're past disclosure, man. This is confirmation. And no, it's not. It's another ufological mechanism to separate suckers from their money. And and good stuff might come from it. Good information might come from it. But this is a profit-making operation. And when you say that to people, like, well, yeah, but that's how it has to be done because Tom DeLonge or whatever.
I think it's also some disinformation in there. It's controlling the narrative.
Oh yeah, I agree.
I mean, it's so like Tom DeLonge, when he did his little public relations press release, a video press release, his YouTube press release, and there were all the people sitting on the stage, and so Tom DeLonge was there with his shirt untucked, and then there were all these people, like, I can't remember, like 6 people behind him on chairs. One of them was Louis, and there was Jim Semivan and Hal Puthoff, and there was a few other folks there. Chris Mellon, insiders, government insiders, but like secret keepers. Let's say that seems a fair way to say it. And the odd duck in that group was certainly Tom DeLonge. Like, one of these things is not like the other. So, like, what is the like, my sense is, if you want to float in, and this is, I haven't researched this. This is my sense. If you want to float some information out there, right? You might as well do it in a way that can be discredited if need be, right? So Tom DeLonge, boy, he's not he's not Stan Friedman, right? You know, he's like a rock and roll guy who played punk rock, you know. So, and I'm all for punk rock, and but I mean, you got to kind of. And so if you're going to have like what they call like a straw man, where you build something up that can be easily knocked down, that's what I see as Tom DeLonge. If they need to move on, and they can just knock down this whole thing, and everyone will say, well, it was just a silly thing because Tom DeLonge was involved. I am certain there's real information being leaked out. I think it's probably in among some messy stuff too.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there is. And the thing is, there's real information, and then there's real information that we know that where the context of the information and the background of the information is accurate. And I think any real stuff that gets released, it's going to be, surrounded by so much nonsense and disinformation and misinformation that, I don't know how much anybody's ever really going to be able to trust of it, or should. I mean, I think
that's the plan. I think that was a decision, a conscious decision going into it. Yeah, that's my sense. I don't know.
That's what makes the most sense to me. The stuff is, I think it was this fall, their SEC report came out, and because they're publicly traded, and deficits of $37 million and things like that, and then they came out on social media and saying, oh, you're misinterpreting everything, you don't know everything from an SEC report. Well, I know that you've been taking a lot of investors' money and got a accumulated deficit. The thing is, the report states these factors raise doubt about the company's ability to continue as a going concern, and there's going to continue to sell stock and use a revolving line of credit to fund operations. Is what their report to the SEC says, and that does not sound. It sounds like something that was created and manufactured to do a specific job, rather than to be a sustainable, viable business. I don't know. I need to get my finance people on this, but I know a guy who teaches accounting, so my finance people. So, but I don't know. Something just continues to seem off about it, and the thing that the UFO world does that just frustrates me so much is you can't trust the government because they're the one keeping the secrets, except this one guy from the government, because he's telling the truth. Yeah,
and that would be Louis.
Yep.
And I suspect if you sat Louis down and at the bar and powwowed with him, and I bet you could tell some interesting stories. I bet you would nuance them in a way that a secret keeper might. But I bet you he would be a delight to hang out with. And I bet you would learn some stuff. And where's Greg Bishop? He's better at talking about this kind of stuff than I am. I mean, if you played by their game, he would give you everything he could possibly give you, as far as what he would be allowed to give you. And that, I'm certain that would be pretty interesting. And at the same time, I'm certain he's holding some cards close to his vest.
Oh yeah. And that sort of, they are. I'm feeling flattered that this important person with knowledge is talking to me, and so I'm going to be more likely to accept what they say because now I feel like an insider. And
that was right in Tom DeLonge's speech. If you watch that, that video press conference from over a year ago now, I mean, he says it straight up. He says, and then there was a guy. We only called him by the letter L. And then when I finally did meet, we'd only say, we weren't allowed to say anything about him. He was the most mysterious guy. And, there was this buildup, and it was like the magician saying, I learned this trick, back when I was, in Tibet. He was building the trick up, and he, talks in Tom DeLonge in the in the press conference, the video press conference, that I had to go to these buildings and I had got to walk down halls and they had these special things in the hallway that would make white noise to like, so you couldn't spy in here. I was like, oh, well, yeah, okay. So what does this have to do with? And so he was, you could see the little, the glee in his eyes that he was invited into this insider group, which I would have been pretty gleeful to in a lot of ways, but I don't know if I would have, no one's going to invite me there. So,
yeah. And this sort of attitude is sort of tangential, but Jeremy Corbell.
Oh, that's right. We can talk about that. He was the star of the 2018. Yes.
I watched the Lazar movie. I finished it right before we got on the call. But Corbell tweeted the other day, I actually like Rick Doty. He's a good dude.
I try never to use the word dude.
Exactly. Corbell he's a gimmick and a half.
So I mean, I'm all for showmanship. I'm all for the guy getting after it. Like I published a book. It's awful to try to publish things. So he was.
Your book was good though.
Yeah, he was all over Facebook. Actually, I thought I think that. I don't know, whatever. I'm at the age now where, like, I watch a documentary that's edited too quick, and I'm still like, I was like already past. By the time MTV came along, I was still, hoping for less edits, So I'm kind of generationally incapable of really embracing a movie with that many fast cuts.
Yeah, it was the Lazar, that's the most recent one, right? The Lazar film. I think one thing that affected my perspective on it was I'd seen and heard Corbell's media stuff promoting it, and I mean his oh gosh, when he talked about how he crushed Stan Friedman in a debate, man, he just crushed Stan Friedman. It's like, no, you didn't. You acted like a douchebag to an old man. I mean, way to go, pal. But the whole thing about this Lazar documentary is it says absolutely nothing new about Bob Lazar. And it what it basically says is the questions you had about Bob Lazar's credibility 30 years ago, you're stupid to ask those questions because you're missing the big picture. Did Bob Lazar lie about his education?
Let's not. Yeah, they just brushed over that.
Yeah. George Knapp says, like, these are just people who hate Bob Lazar. And if they were to prove that, if you were to prove that he went to MIT and Caltech, they would just find something else to complain about. It's like, but that you're supposed to be a journalist, George. There's the trilogy of Jacques Vallée books, and it's the one that's more about government conspiracies. The one. Yeah,
the one. The Revelations. They almost have all three have the same name.
Confirmation, Revelation,
and
forget the last one.
I'm looking at my bookshelf. Revelations.
Okay.
Revelations. Is the government cover-up one.
There's like 3 pages in that book on Bob Lazar, and it is is typical of Jacques Vallée. It is the most informative, in-depth, and completely changes the way to look at it. It's in. I wish I actually just printed that up recently, and I just can't remember when it was the whole thing with Bob Lazar, and I was like, did this show up in the movie? And it didn't. And I'm going to have to paraphrase from memory now of the what he was saying. He met Bob Lazar and had dinner with him on the Queen Mary in Orange County there, and he basically said, "So what did you have in the lab?" Lazar kind of said, "We really didn't have much in the lab. Like we had an oscilloscope and we had a Geiger counter and he named a couple of very typical things you might have in a laboratory, a scientific laboratory." And Jacques Vallée's like, "That's it? That's it?" Yes, you were like researching, and you didn't have like, and then he went and listed all these things that you might want. He didn't have an electron microscope. Nope. Didn't have this, didn't have that. And I was like, nope. And then he said, like, he talked about, there's a scene which they briefly talk about in the where he's like taken with these guards, and there's this whole thing, the guards had guns, and they said, okay, we'll shoot you dead if you don't listen to our orders. And then they walk down this hall, and there he's like, you can only look straight ahead. And then they stop in front of this door, and the guards kind of say, hey, check this out. And they look on this thing, and there's like, he said it's kind of from behind. He didn't really see much. He only saw it for a second, but he basically said he had the impression there was a gray alien in there. And he says he's even said this all throughout his thing. He said, I don't know, it could have been a doll for all I know. Could have been a like mannequin for all I know. So, and then he said something very strange, like he was getting dates wrong. And Jacques Vallée was like, well, which was it? Was it like, 1994, 1995? And Bob Lazar said something to the effect of, I don't know. It's really foggy. They were taking a lot of blood at that point.
Yeah. Yes, I remember that. And
it's like, why wasn't, I mean, that's pretty interesting. So
the whole thing about, wasn't there like, I remember, I think it was one of his appearances on Coast to Coast where he said something like, he would get on the plane and then have no recollection of anything until he was getting off the plane or something like that. When they were transporting him somewhere, there's just stuff that's like, something is, I'm reasonably confident that Bob Lazar worked in some connection with something that was around there. Right. I'm a big fan of the theory that he was basically hired and conditioned as a vessel for whatever they wanted to release to the public in the late 80s. He's just this guy who, has some practical scientific knowledge, but no credentials. We can bring him in to do some stuff, and we can take a lot of blood around this time and, do whatever to him. And he's telling this story. And it's, I see disinformation everywhere, but
so I just opened the document, which was I scanned the pages of the book, and I'll just read a little bit from it. This is Jacques Vallée's book. My memory has been tampered with, he said rather sadly. What do you mean? Said Jacques Vallée. There was a sort of infirmary in the back of the facility. They gave me all kinds of tests there. Jacques Vallée asks, can you describe these tests? Well, for one thing, they took an awful lot of blood from me. They said it was necessary because of the things I was working on. Jacques Vallée asks, what else? They made me drink a glass full of yellow liquid that smelled like pine, and it seems that they hypnotized me several times, and I never found out why. That wasn't in the Jeremy Corbell movie.
Right.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing that was missing. Because that's huge, right? I mean, that why would you not mention that unless you were dead set on making a documentary to just accept Lazar's claims?
Now, to me, Jacques Vallée clearly stated he liked Bob Lazar. He said things like I've met a lot of people who talk this talk, and he knew the difference between mass and acceleration, and he was a real physicist. Right. Jacques Vallée, who was someone who would probably know, said I trust that he was a physicist. Mm-hmm. But he implies that there was some sort of disinformation campaign. He was used as a tool for someone else's. Someone else was playing the chess game, and he was just a piece on the chessboard.
Right. And that it's the film doesn't talk about that. I was really, I had like an infinitesimal, amount of hope that they would, somehow bring up Bill Cooper's allegation that Lazar was running a meth lab back in the 90s. I was really hoping they didn't. But they, the FBI raid, the FBI or the multiple agencies that raided Lazar's place. they mentioned I've been raided before, and they make it so sinister. They don't really follow up on it much, but they make it sound so sinister. Oh my gosh, he must be telling the truth because he must have element 115 there in his house, because why else would they raid Bob Lazar? Well,
Right.
a Google search brings up, the most sort of in-depth one. It's 2006. Wired magazine did a story featuring Lazar and his wife. They were raided by, among other people, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, because he does a lot of illegal fireworks type of stuff. He did his Desert Blast thing, and after 9/11, there were a lot of chemicals that were put on restricted lists that he was dealing in. So why was Bob Lazar being raided? Because he's doing stuff that gets you raided.
If Bob Lazar called me up and said, Mike, if you want to go out in the desert and come out in the desert and blow stuff up with me, I would do it in a blink of an
absolutely.
eye. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So-
I did think that the Skinwalker Ranch film that Corbell did was much better.
Oh, interesting. I just thought the reverse.
Oh, really? I thought maybe I'm not as jaded about it. Actually, okay. I think the Skinwalker Ranch film was much better. I do not think it was good.
Okay.
I think it was relatively better. I think it was a better made piece of film because there were less shots of Corbell sitting at his kitchen table talking to George Knapp on a speakerphone. Because that's cinematic dynamite right there. It's but and my relative appreciation for the Skinwalker Ranch film comes down to the scene near the end where they're in the bedroom, the very austere, sparse bedroom, talking to the voice disguised, faceless new owners of the ranch.
Yeah.
And I think that was just done in such a nicely sinister way that I appreciated the style of that scene. I thought that was, it's like I watched it, and that it's probably just me. But that's the sort of thing that makes me feel like, I don't like this. This is creeping me out in a good way. But man, I mean, between Corbell's things and just I haven't seen the History Channel's Project Blue Book. I haven't watched a whole episode.
I have not seen any of it. But here's I'll interrupt as far as the History Channel's Blue Book thing. The end of episode 2. Boy, let me tell you, I got people contacting me. There's a scene and someone actually held their phone up to the television and played it. So I have a little video of it. And I need to watch it. But the character playing Hynek is him and another person are like at a groovy 1950s sedan, and they're out in the desert. And there's this, everything in the sedan starts, the radio starts going wiggy and the lights start flashing, and then a UFO flies over. Beautifully, wonderful special effect. Hovers over, flies over, and then coasts across the desert, and then the car goes back to normal. The sound dies down, and they're like standing there in wonder, and they hear the call of an owl. And then everyone said, they read your book. So, and which I think they did. It was like, oh my God, that was a little too blatant. So,
so I've watched the first 2 episodes of Project Blue Book, and I expected to hate it, and I did not at all. First of all, they're very upfront about the fact that they're fictionalizing the stories.
Yep.
They started out by basically saying the government started Project Blue Book as disinformation. It's not that far off from what really happened, even though it's more fictionalized. And at the end of each episode, they tell you what it was based on, so you can do further research.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
That's good. I sort of, just on Twitter, the guy O'Connell, who wrote the Hynek biography, he's been a little salty about some of the liberties taken, and I get that he's so close to the material that it would have to rankle a little bit, but it is fiction. I have no problem with them fictionalizing it. TV shows and movies that you can't not fictionalize history, because history is history doesn't have a narrative shape that fits into a 45-minute television episode.
Right, exactly.
So you have to impose structure and pace and the different beats and characterizations, and you have to do that. And you know, I will say I think I need to watch. You thinking it's good makes me want to watch it. So because I haven't really heard anybody's opinion on it, but it wasn't 2018, but as far as, you know, television or video things go, my wife really enjoys it, probably as much as I do. We just finished the third part of Hellier, and it is.
I've heard this good stuff about this too.
It's very well done. It is very well done.
Yeah, we'll be doing a whole show on that at some point, because no one has had anything really bad to say about it.
It really, I mean, that alone, that plus the fact that it was just sort of released for free, it is just, you know, mind blowing to me. But I've really enjoyed it, and I think it's a good model for paranormal documentaries going forward. Just sort of a medium form length, not like a little sort of one episode shot. This is, you know, like a ghost hunting episode, and not a never-ending open-ended thing, but 5 episodes looking at all of the sort of things surrounding an event. And I mean, I will just say that in the first episode, when they brought up Alan Greenfield's secret cipher of the UFO knots, I was just like, I'm watching the right thing. This is, I've done my life well to be watching this, because I was like, I never thought I would, of all the things, right?
Wally and Sculder never brought up.
No, and I mean, you never heard it on Coast to Coast or anything like that. You know, it's one of those. It's what, and I know you're going to do a whole show on it, but I just want to say what Hellier sort of brings home to me is that sort of the generation of paranormal thinkers and investigators and writers that sort of came of age in the, you know, 2000s, early 2010s, that sort of generation, that is hope. I just have hope that this group is going to be driving the narrative more than the To the Stars types. You know, this is a good sort of pushback against we've got film of a device flying in the air and the Defense Department told us about it. You know, that kind of, it's like, no, let's talk about secret cipher of the UFO. Let's you know, let's talk about the ufology and the paranormal needs to be weird, and it needs to be a little unsettling. And I think Hellier does a good job of making that weird, that unsettling weirdness, very tangible.
You know, I think usually it's that the people researching it want to cut the weird stuff out.
Yeah, I know. And it
except me.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
There's like a good group now, much more than there used to be, of people who are like, no, the weird stuff is the point. You know, the weird, that's what we're looking at. And you know, I just like it. And even I'm not done with it. The third episode, you know, got a little ghost hunty for me, but you know, it shows the interconnectedness of all of these different fields, and that's something that you don't see enough of either.
Yes.
So I mean, it's hitting all the right beats for me, and it gives me hope.
Fair enough. Well, we got only a few minutes left. Either of you want to comment on like the Corey Good stuff, which also made UFO news all 2018?
Man, he really took the secret space program stuff and turned it into something stupid, didn't he?
Oh my God, Corey Good's been booted from. We have Gaia TV, and so Andrea and I sit around and watch Gaia TV, and it's so painful to try to, like, you know, because David Wilcock is a great presenter. Like he did a wonderful interview with Rupert Sheldrake, right? So he's like dialed on certain things, and then I just feel like I've talked to a lot of people, seen UFOs and had experiences. I've never heard anyone talk about seeing a big blue bird.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just feel like, and then all of a sudden they got kicked off, and there's this new guy. It was totally seamless. I can't remember the new guy's name, and he's on Gaia TV now, basically telling the same story. And I like there was like all of a sudden Corey Good's gone, poof, gone, and this new guy just is on the show. And I'm like, how did you know, like, oh, it just seemed like I'm boy, just be careful with that stuff. I mean, to me, I don't buy it. I don't buy it, and I get in a lot of trouble with other folks because I know a lot of people who do buy it, and I don't. So.
I don't understand how anyone does buy it. It's so ridiculous and so based on nothing but his word. You know, it's like, why is this the thing you choose to follow?
Yeah, and that goes back to where Rich Dolan is very skilled at you know, basically calling him out. And he would do better than I would. So I'm not gonna. And so I have like, this is that aspect of the UFO research and stuff like that. I don't care about that stuff. Like people on Mars and going to other planets and like fighting aliens and like. I just like, my plate is full. I don't have to go there, and I got plenty of interesting stuff on my plate without having to go there.
And I'll say, even if this came across as this is a new movie, I'd be going, well, this is kind of dumb.
Yeah, it's just so wacky and weird, but you know, kind of dumb at the same time.
So if there is a secret space program, and there is. Right, because I mean, I remember back in the 80s, they would send the space shuttle up, and they would say, "We can't tell you what's going on in the space shuttle because it's all classified," and they were putting up some satellite or something.
Yeah,
which I understand. So so that would be called a secret space program. They were doing something secret in space, right? So
sure,
I think so. In the last 30 years, what's been going on? Do we have back engineered UFOs? Do we have this? That stuff is all in a fog of misinformation, disinformation, gleeful information. Like, it's fun, it's seductive, but it's a mess to try to make sense of. So if I was, I'm just playing this thing here. If I was one of the secret keepers and I had an unlimited budget, you know, how cheap would it be to get a guy down a little TV show every once in a while to say like, oh, I had this thing where I went to Mars and just say the most outlandish things ever. Then the secret space program is tainted with that stained, muddled nonsense.
Because that phrase is increasingly connected to
Corey Good
and the sphere being alliance, and they've got a message for us, but it's always been distorted by humanity. And no, I'm absolutely not a contactee from 1955. You know, it just sounds. It's easy to sort of fall into the, you know, this is a government disinformation plan, but boy, it would be a good one, wouldn't it? Like you said,
you know, how cheap would it be? I mean, compared to other things the government has to do to keep a secret, you know, like, you know,
it's like you just keep good supplied with hair gel, and you're probably fine. Wow, I'm catty today.
You are meow. Yeah, you. Yeah, so.
As opposed to normal.
Yeah, that's true. MUFON's rubbing off on me.
Hey, so here I will do a little push for a friend of mine. His name is Ray Hernandez. He was put out a giant book called Beyond UFOs. Do you know anything about this?
No.
I have it on my shelf. It's like one of the things you put it on the book. It is 926.
Oh, wow.
So I feel like I've worked on a few books, and I have just the inkling of like what it means to put a book out and how to sell a book and stuff. Boy, it's a bad business model to put on a 926-page book. So,
and what is it?
It's called, the title of the book is Beyond UFOs, and it's the science of consciousness and contact with non-human intelligence, Volume 1. So there's another 900-page book in in the works here. Oh, actually, it says 820-page book. Sorry, I'm looking at two different things here. So that's pretty reasonable, 820 pages. But so this fellow who put it out, I'm being a little. Now I just you may said you made the hair gel thing, and I get all catty myself. So the guy Ray Hernandez is credited as one of the authors. It's a big fat book, and all kinds of people contributed to it. And I should be able to let me just read more here on the thing here. That was a foundation which used to be called FREE, FREE, Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Intelligence. The name has since been changed to the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences. So the Edgar Mitchell died in, I guess, 2 years ago now, and he was very involved in this organization FREE, which was so the first 100 pages of this book is an in-depth questionnaire that was then crunched by statisticians from Harvard. They were retired, but they were retired professors from Harvard who crunched these numbers, and they came up with some really interesting stuff. Yes, I worked in advertising, and I know what it means to have this type of stuff I was doing is which flavor of Hawaiian Punch do kids like more? Do they like the orange or the red? So I worked in, and you very quickly learned that this is a slippery slope to try to figure out, how to read statistics, let's say. But there's some pretty interesting stuff in here. And I think the one thing that comes up over and over and over again is that, and I don't have the number right in front of me, but it's about, they asked experiencers, did you have a negative experience or a positive experience? Roughly 70% said positive, roughly 30% said negative, which is not what the public conception is.
No.
It's the inverse of the public conception. So people are having mostly positive experiences, according to this research. And then there's all kinds. So it's a quite a remarkable book, and I doubt I'll ever read it from beginning to end. It is a wonderful book to pick up and just open anywhere. I'll tell you that.
Wow.
So
okay.
And so that book came out. And there's no index in the paper book.
Whoa.
So I got the Kindle book. I got the Kindle book, and it's wonderful because then I can
you
just
can search for anything.
Yeah.
It's meant to be a Kindle book.
Plus who's the author again?
It's written. Let me just click on the thing here. Ray Hernandez, John Climo, Dr. John Climo, PhD, Dr. Rudy Shields, PhD. Excuse me, Dr. Rudy Shield, PhD, and then the organization FREE. And other people worked on it. There's a woman, Susan Kornacki, who worked on one of the chapters, and stuff. And she's a very dedicated, serious researcher. So this is so grounded in two things. It's grounded in pragmatic research. At the same time, it is, and I think they put something on their mission statement. They changed their mission statement and said, "We are not a UFO organization. We are looking into the consciousness aspect of paranormal experiences." And it's quite remarkable.
Huh.
He would be a great interview for you.
That's what I'm thinking.
Get a hold of him.
Sounds really interesting.
Yeah, he's a zealot, I think would be as good a term as any. He is all about this, and he is very forceful in his zeal, in a very wonderful way. It's not like he's not off-putting.
All right. Well, I think that covers most of the main events in the last year. Honestly,
I think so. It really was. Art Bell died. I think.
Oh, yeah.
That's the only other thing. I mean, leaving a huge gap in the field of starting up a radio show, then quitting it in 6 weeks. So
he quit it because he wanted, he didn't want the podcast to go out. He didn't want the things archived online. And I was like,
no, he did. He did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was.
So with Sirius, not everyone had Sirius, and because it's a pay thing, not everyone wanted to get it. But he wanted to make it freely available on the website, and they wouldn't do it because that's their business model.
Yeah, right. It's selling radios and subscriptions, and then the second one on his network that he started up, there was some convoluted thing where he was being threatened, and supposedly somebody shot at his house, and one of the Art Bell fan forums, like, they were like in contact with the Nye County sheriff, who was like, no, it wasn't like that. And so there was Art went on the forum to defend himself, and then he quit. And the thing is, he'd sold like these memberships to the network, and people were like, kind of like with Sirius, I'm signing up because Art Bell, and then no, it's Art Bell's protege or understudy or whatever the person was.
Heather Wade.
Wade, yeah. And then
that's not really an enviable position to be put in.
No, I would not want to be why would you take that job? It's like, okay, I'm Art Bell. I'm beloved by millions, and I'm a legend, and I'm quitting suddenly, and I want you to take over. Heck no, sir. I'm just going to go over here and start my own show, and not be the person who failed at replacing Art Bell.
Yeah.
But it's he was young, relatively young, and young wife, and little kids,
Mm-hmm.
sort of the I was going to say third family.
Was it third? Okay.
It was. I think his yeah. It's, I lose track, but I think at least third wife, maybe fourth. But I mean, just his son had just been born. It was like a year old, maybe,
something like that.
The daughter was like 6 or something like that.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, it does. And it was, that's even though he wasn't broadcasting anymore, just a huge, no more Art Bell.
Because everyone figured he'd be back sooner or later.
Yeah, because he's Art Bell, and he always comes back. And it's I think the landscape has completely changed. I mean, look how many shows and podcasts there are where you have people interviewing other people about the paranormal now. And you can say, well, Long John Neville started that, Billy Goodman started that, Art Bell made it
popularized
something.
It.
Yeah, internationalized it. And so it's, and he's such a good radio host. He could make anything entertaining. The worst guests ever, the worst callers, he could get something out of it. and that's just, it's a lost art. The unscreened live caller thing. You're never going to see that again. I mean, corporations do not have the stomach for it. You don't know what might happen.
So we are just about out of time. Aaron, where can people find you and your podcast?
People can find The Saucer Life at saucerlife.com. New episode coming soon. Encounter 708. We're going to hell for this, where we look at demons and UFOs and the 1955 book Round Trip to Hell in a Flying Saucer.
Nice. Okay, and Mike?
You can find me at my website, which is a blog, which is hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. You can also Google UFOs and owls, and I will be the first thing that comes up, so I'm easy to find.
All right. Well, thank you both for doing this.
Thank you.
This was part 972 of UFO History.
Yeah.
And a special thanks to all my patrons who help make this podcast possible. And a special shout out to those pledging $10 or more. Tim. An extra special thanks to Tim. Allison Cook. Super Inframan. Andy McNamara. Bart Ooms. Charles Beauregard. Craig Cicernos. Eric Citron. Jose A. Kevin. Scott Morris Everett. Sean Cosgrove. Robert Groom. Roland Belstadt. Mike McGuire. Riker and Stark, John Rutledge Foster III, Sasha Org, Christopher Vaughn, Samantha, Ben Crow, American Rambler, Carla Mahoney, John Eddy, Jennifer Campbell, Janet Runyon, Nathan Seriah, Chris, Mark Brady, William Lovelace, Patricia Giaquinta, Kevin Schreck, Paul Buscini, and Alfred Tuttle. Thank you all so very much. All right, so that's another UFO history show in the books. And we did a Patreon extra segment with Mike and Aaron, so patrons can check that out. And sooner or later, I plan on putting that entire series up on YouTube in one file, because that's been requested a bunch of times. So it's just a matter of getting it done. There's a lot of parts there to stitch together. It's going to be one long, long file. See you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.